forced to flee their homes and their country, Ukrainians on the run. Their children making the best of it, oblivious to the fact that a week-old war just turned them into refugees. This is one of Hungary's border crossings with Ukraine. There is a steady stream of people arriving here in vehicles and on foot. All of the Ukrainian new arrivals are women and children. Hungarian aid workers welcome the refugees and bring them free of charge to the nearest village, where the community center is now a place of refuge. Some people stay here, others pause for food and warmth before moving on. Among those here, Anna Tipperchuk, her mother Svetlana, and her 16-month-old son.
Yes, this is my son, Mark.
They crossed the border to Hungary this morning after spending nearly a week on the road.
We very thankful for Hungary people. It's very hard work that he's doing.
The Hungarian village of Barabash has a population of 1,060 people. The deputy mayor tells me the village has taken in more than 100 Ukrainians, including housing families in at least 20 village homes. As we speak, another family arrives from Ukraine.
There's a little baby.
Yesterday, we took care of a 5-day-old baby who came across the border, the deputy mayor tells me. A 5-day-old baby. Victoria Kurina says when the Russians invaded, she fled her home near Kiev for what she thought would be one night. A week later, she and her son just arrived in a foreign country.
What belongings do you have?
I have just one jacket. I think Ukraine is very strong. It's a country with very strong people, strong nation, and amazing power. That's why I don't worry, but of course my heart is broken.
She says she tried to convince her friends in Russia via social media about the deadly attack their military is carrying out on her homeland.
What do your Russian friends say to you?
It's not true. No, it's not possible.
They don't believe you?
No.
Як Адольф Гітлер цей Путін.
10-year-old Timur chimes in saying, Vladimir Putin is like Adolf Hitler. He's attacking the world, just like Hitler did. There are almost no men here aside from the elderly, because all Ukrainian men of fighting age have been ordered to stay behind to defend their country from the Russian invasion.
I'm very angry for Russian people.
I want to tell Russians that it is time to do something. It's time to change something, says Anna Tipperchuk. My son doesn't deserve to be forced to run across Ukraine and across borders, she adds. He doesn't deserve to grow up like this.
Now, Aaron, all across this Hungarian border region, I can't stress enough, you just see again and again in stores, in guest houses, in cafes, Ukrainian women with their children, no men around. It is an eerie phenomenon, a result of this. The deputy mayor, who's taking in these families, she predicts that this is just the beginning. She predicts this will get much, much worse. Aaron?
Ivan, thank you very much. And thanks to all of you. AC 360 starts now.
Good evening tonight from Lviv, Ukraine. We begin with breaking news, potentially ominous news. This is closed-circuit video of the nuclear power plant in Zaporizhia in southern Ukraine. Now, it is the largest in the country with 6 nuclear reactors. It's been under attack for several days from Russian attacks, and now it is said to be on fire. It is burning. Firefighters reportedly cannot battle the blaze. These are live images you're seeing because of the continued shooting. Ukraine's foreign minister tweeting this just a moment ago, and I'm quoting directly now from Ukraine's foreign minister, quote, Russian army is firing from all sides upon Zaporizhia NPP, the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. Fire has already broken out. If it blows up, it will be 10 times larger than Chernobyl. Russians must immediately cease the fire, allow firefighters, establish a security zone, exclamation mark. Now, elsewhere, Russian attacks on civilians accelerated today. This was a huge apartment complex in a city about 60 miles south of Kyiv. which has seen withering attacks over the last several days and where rescue efforts have been halted due to more shelling. Look at these images. This, again, is a residential area. A local driver captured one such attack, target unclear, on dashboard camera video published today by the New York Times. You'll see it freeze at one point where they highlight the individual projectiles falling on what the driver says is a residential area, and you'll see multiple projectiles.
Пиздец. И это они, блядь, не бомбят дома жилые? Это пиздец.
That is not precision bombing. Those are multiple projectiles falling in what is said to be a residential area. Along with the growing attacks on civilian areas, yet more people forced to relocate or flee the country entirely. Upwards of 1 million people are now refugees, and that number is rising according to the UN. Yet in all the grim news and even grimmer forecasting, there is also this. Berlin's central train station in Germany, thousands of Berliners greeting refugees, greeting Ukrainian women and children, carrying signs, some in Ukrainian, offering total strangers places to stay. And late today, we learned the Biden administration is extending temporary protected status to the approximately 30,000 Ukrainians now in this country, permitting them to stay when their visas expire. Now, as only CNN can, we have correspondents across the region this evening. CNN Chief International Correspondent Clarissa Ward is in Kyiv. CNN's Sarah Seidner is at a crossing point in Poland. CNN's Nick Payton-Walsh is in southern Ukraine, where Russian forces are advancing. Also, CNN contributor Jill Doherty is in Moscow. CNN's Caitlin Collins at the White House for us as well. And CNN Chief National Security Correspondent Jim Sciutto is with me here in Lviv. Right now, I want to go to a nuclear policy expert, Graham Allison from Harvard's Belfer Center. Graham, could you give us a sense, how concerned should everyone be about the situation at this very large nuclear power plant?
Well, the facts are unfolding as we, sit here, but I would say in general, very concerned. We should remember Chernobyl in '86 was the meltdown that spewed radioactive material all over Western Europe. And so it's conceivable that one could have another version of that. I hope not, I pray not, but things could be worse.
The images we're seeing, it's very, obviously it's, the middle of the night, it's hard to see. We've zoomed in on what appears to be the fire. We're told firefighters can't fight it because of ongoing attacks. Is a fire at a nuclear power plant, I mean, it doesn't sound good, but are there systems within a plant to automatically fight a fire?
Well, yes, but not all fires. And not all fires in a power plant have catastrophic consequences. We can remember what happened at Fukushima. The issues really go to whether the fire may be in the cooling pits, because there you have material that's particularly radioactive, or if ultimately a fire could cause a meltdown of the reactor. And in that case, you would have a huge release of radioactivity. And as I say, the radioactivity that was released in '86 from the Chernobyl crisis or tragedy, spread all over, not just Ukraine, but all over Western Europe and into Russia as well. So the Russians understand the risks that are associated with a nuclear power plant. The Ukrainian professionals do too. So I'm sure they're both, working to try to avoid the worst, but nuclear power plants are dangerous.
Now, assuming, again, the statement from the Ukrainian foreign minister is really describing what is going on. We don't have eyes on the ground there. We can't confirm exactly what is going on. Again, we're basing our reporting off what we're being told by Ukrainian authorities here, obviously. But of all the things we do, what are the things we need to know specifically in order to determine, just for the hours ahead for our viewers, what information do we need to know specifically about this fire, about its location, etc., in order to determine how serious this may be?
Well, a good question. I wish I had a good answer. I would say that there's so many uncertainties surrounding it. But if I were doing my checklist, in first instance, where is the fire? And secondly, who's in control of the power plant? It was reported that Russians had taken control because of their concern about these risks. But is there fighting that gave rise to the fire? Or, how did this come about? And then thirdly, uh, what about the people who are trying to manage or put out the fire, given particularly the difficulties at night and with the uncertainties around it? And if there's fighting going on around Chernobyl, around this facility, which I can't tell from the information that's available, then obviously having firefighters go try to deal with a fire in the midst of gunfire, not a very good idea. But we should remember, as I say, if we go back to 1986, there was a terrible crisis at Chernobyl. It released a huge amount of radioactivity. It actually changed the weather and the growing patterns all over a great swath of Russia, Ukraine, and much of Western Europe. So nuclear power plants, in principle, it contain enough material such that if there's a fire in the cooling facilities, that can release a lot of very dangerous radioactivity. And if there's a meltdown at the reactor, that can produce a huge release of radioactivity. And God knows there's enough problems in Ukraine without a nuclear catastrophe on top of it.
How and again, this may, I don't know if you know this, but how hardened are the reactors themselves, the structures that contain nuclear material? How hardened are they to something like a rocket strike, or to incoming potential collisions with anything coming into them?
Well, that's a question I did look at when I was looking at writing a book on nuclear terrorism. And nuclear reactors, let's take ones here in the US, but also the one at Chernobyl, are not designed against attacks by advanced weapons. So even if an aircraft, an airliner, were to crash into a reactor like the one at Indian Point in New York, for example, I looked at that in some detail, you could have a great release of radioactivity. So if rockets were targeting a nuclear reactor, then I think they could quite successfully, to create a huge fire that could conceivably produce a large release. But I have not seen any evidence of attacks that produce the fire. Maybe that's what happened. But again, it's, I think, a little hard to tell at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it would be obviously ideal for Ukrainian authorities, who apparently still are in control of this plant or still on site at this plant. If there are Ukrainian firefighters there, if there must be Ukrainian authorities there, you would think, just out of a sense of responsibility to the global community, getting as much information out as quickly as possible and not causing hysteria would be a good idea. Trying to get as much information right now into people's hands about what it was, the cause of this fire at the very least, and where the fire is located. Those seem to be basic questions that we still need to be answered.
I agree. And I think the other thing is the level of professionalism in both the Ukrainian nuclear community that deals with their reactor and in the Russian community, I would say, has been impressive. And so I think if it were up to the professionals who are trying to manage a nuclear power production facility, I would have a higher level of confidence. If this has gotten caught up in the warfare between Russia and Ukraine, then God only knows, because almost no normal systems, no normal parts of our lives are hardened against serious military attack. That's just not not one of the things that normal people prepare for most of the time.
I should point out to our viewers, these images are coming from closed circuit monitors. We are not in control of these images. These are being provided by authorities at the facility. So it's not only that's why there's low quality to it, because it's a closed circuit camera, but also you see the images changing. And again, that's not something we have control over. But it appears that fire. This is video now from earlier of the fire, which you can see there, sort of in the middle to the right of that taller structure. They're saying that this is also the firefight, that those streaks across there, which look almost like snow, are actually tracer fire during a firefight at the facility. So what's interesting about this is that it apparently, and again, we don't know if have been rockets or missiles in this area, but I mean that would appear to be tracer fire of relatively large caliber weapons. So it looks like more of a ground fight, at least at this time on this camera.
I can't, from the pictures, really interpret what's going on in the detail, but I'm sure that as the night goes on, we'll learn more.
Yeah, I want to bring in our Jim Sciutto, who's also here with me in Lviv. I mean, Jim, obviously this is potentially a very large concern. You would think, I mean, even Russian authorities, with any sense of responsibility, even for Russia, it would not be a good idea to be messing with nuclear power plants.
I should say that prior to the invasion, it was the U.S. intelligence assessment that Russia would not deliberately attack nuclear power plants here. Russia is invading the country with the intention of taking over the country and would not want to radiate the country right prior to that. However, it was part of the U.S. assessment that Russia would attack so as to disconnect the plants from the electrical grid, at least temporarily, as part of their effort to squeeze cities and bring Ukraine to its knees. The trouble is, of course, artillery fire or rocket fire or airstrikes around nuclear power plant in and of themselves are dangerous because, of course, one of those shots could go astray.
It's inherently
right?
unstable.
It's inherently unstable, and you will often hear, and I think you and I have talked about this, that the U.S. view of Russian accuracy with its weapons is not great, right? That they may intend to strike here and end up striking there. But I should say, it was the U.S. assessment that it wouldn't be deliberate, right? Because they own it. You invade it, you own it. But they did want to strike near with the intention of disconnecting from the grid.
Which makes sense from, I mean, just in the sick logic of warfare, it makes sense to disconnect the power grids in the country you are attacking to deprive civilians and everybody of heat, of electricity, of all the things which to try to break the will of a population.
It's a siege mentality, right? And we're seeing that play out in a number of cities here where you encircle, you put pressure on, right, and fire deadly fire as well, including against civilians, but you also deprive them of what they need, food, power, water, etc. And this would be a case. The trouble is, of course, this is a war. Those weapons are powerful, and anything near a plant like this is potentially dangerous.
Yeah. Graham Allison, I appreciate your expertise and I appreciate you being with us. Obviously, there is still a lot we need to know, and I just want to stress there is a lot we do not know. And in these kind of situations, I always like to stress what we don't know. We don't know the exact location of this fire. We don't know if it is in any place inside anywhere that is potentially could lead to any kind of a release. So I don't want to be overstating this. Obviously, there was a very alarming statement from a high-level Ukrainian official, a tweet that went out. But again, there is an ongoing war. If you look at it, there's a reason why they would want to put out a statement which is alarming and attention-getting, and it may very well be accurate. But we just want to be very careful about what we were saying about this and just acknowledging there's a lot we don't know. We're going to continue to follow that obviously very closely over the next several hours and bring you any information as we get it. So we'll follow those developments from the nuclear power plant, again, the largest in Europe. We'll also check in with our correspondents in the field. Later, Clarissa Ward visits a children's hospital where, despite the shelling outside, the caring has never stopped. We'll be right back. Fire and gunfire at Ukraine's largest nuclear plant. Now, moments ago, the International Atomic Energy Agency tweeted, quote, IAEA is aware of reports of shelling at Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, NPP, in contact with Ukrainian authorities about situation. Joining us now is Clarissa Ward, Sarah Seidner, Jill Doherty, and Caitlin Collins. I want to start with Caitlin Collins. You've heard from the White House about this fire at the nuclear plant. What are they saying?
Anderson, they don't seem to know much more than we do. They are also still monitoring this, trying to figure out what exactly is happening here. Obviously, you can see from this footage that the fire is underway, and we know the reports of the shelling and what the Ukrainian officials have said. And obviously, the White House is in touch with them, but they're still assessing this situation just as much as we are. And so that remains to be seen what happens here, of course, what the impact of this is going to be. But the White House is closely monitoring this, given, of course, the potential for damage here. They don't yet know what is going on. They're still talking to Ukrainian authorities, but obviously this is deeply concerning to them.
Yeah, and again, we'll continue to follow it. There's a lot we do not know, and a lot to learn still. Caitlin, thank you. Clarissa, the warning that from French officials following President Macron's call with Putin that they believe the worst is yet to come. Explain what you have been seeing today.
Well, Anderson, it's already been a bad few days, but I would say today was the worst that we've seen in terms of the types of material that are coming in, videos posted online from all around the country, but particularly in a town called Chernihiv, which is about 70 miles north of here, where there were multiple strikes. Vast residential apartment building apparently targeted. In one video that I watched, a man is shouting, it was aptieka, which means it was a pharmacy or a drugstore that was targeted, and then you can hear a woman screaming from another part of the area, dieti, dieti, which means children, children, and the video is very graphic, so I don't think we can show it to you, but you can see the bodies of civilians lying on the ground. We're hearing from local authorities in Chernihiv that more than 30 people were killed today in those attacks. Also, closer to the capital, just to the northwest, the town of Borodyanka. Again, the foreign minister, Dmytro Kuleba, saying that there were many civilian casualties there. Again, just astonishing images, Anderson, of residential apartment buildings, big tower blocks with gaping holes in them as a result of being hit by what we believe to be Russian strikes, Russian aerial bombardment. Yeah. I've watched countless other videos that CNN's been able to geolocate today where you can hear Russian fighter jets screeching overhead, followed by enormous blasts. And the sense is that what we're seeing is that the fighting is gradually getting closer and closer.
Yeah, I mean, Clarissa, we're showing those videos right now. These Reuters images, of drone images of that apartment block. I mean, that looks like Grozny. I mean, that is a residential building completely destroyed.
It is. And, the Russian line has always been that this is a sort of restrained military operation, very targeted, not maximalist or expansionist, not intended to be an occupation, not targeting civilians. But when you're looking at those images, that, as you said, which looks like Grozny or sites that I've seen in Aleppo, the almost apocalyptic nature of those pictures of what is left of that apartment building, how can you possibly begin to make the case that you are seriously trying to avoid taking civilian lives? I mean, it simply beggars belief. And so what we're seeing here appears to be a sort of gradual turning up of the heat or upping the ante as Ukrainian forces continue to pretty effectively defend towns and cities around the country, and particularly around this capital, we're seeing Russian forces, and we had been warned about this, Anderson, by U.S. officials. We're seeing them resort to these kinds of indiscriminate tactics, to targeting of civilian structures, because that does have, understandably, a profound effect on a country, on a people, on morale, particularly for civilians who are living through this horror. And so the idea appears to be to try to put on the squeeze, put maximalist pressure onto the people of Ukraine to try to essentially bludgeon any fight that they have left out of them. So far, that doesn't seem to have been effective. We are also seeing Ukrainian forces continuing to fight back. But nonetheless, some serious distressing images and distressing reports from across the country today, Anderson.
Yeah. Sarah Seidner, right after we went off air last night, we got word that more than 1 million refugees, and in fact, to say that they're refugees is really not appropriate. They have become refugees. They are women and children. They are people who were working in Ukraine. They are people, I mean, from Africa and all around the world, just like you and me, who are now forced to be refugees by circumstances. They have fled Ukraine, more than 1 million people now. You're still at the border. What have you seen today?
We are at a train station, and I want to give you an example of what the people who are fleeing with sometimes just the clothes on their back are seeing as they show up in Poland and get off that train. You see that sign behind me? The sign says, "Here you are safe. Welcome to Poland." So you are seeing the kind of work that is being done here to try to make sure that people feel comfortable. And I'm going to quickly take you inside, because all day and all night we are seeing people flowing in here. Sometimes there are a lot because a train will have dropped people off from Lviv, for example. People are bringing their dogs. People are, of course, bringing anything that they can, but usually it's just one bag. I mean, think about it. You leave your house and all you have is one bag. So you have to decide what to take and what not to take. Inside, when people come in from the war, this is what they're greeted with. On your right, there is SIM cards. They are free so that people can make phone calls when they get into this country without having any trouble. Over here to my right, you are also seeing food. It's hot food. They are bringing this every single day. It is never not available for people who are hungry. And then here you can get help trying to figure out where you might go. If anyone has a medical problem, there are people here to help with any sort of medical issue that someone might have and try to help them, for example, fill a prescription. And then as you go along, notice these signs. These signs that people are holding up are often signs to say, look, we can take you somewhere. Do you need a ride? We have space for you in our homes. And that is what we are seeing here. It is an incredible outpouring of giving from people, of volunteerism from people. Many of these people are just here to simply volunteer from all over Europe, by the way, not just Poland. The Polish are here in mass, but there are people from Germany and Denmark that we have talked to today who are opening their homes and offering anything that people need. They can try and get it right here in this train station. Anderson?
It's really remarkable to see. Sarah Seidner, I appreciate you showing us that. Jill Doherty in Moscow. The world heard from Vladimir Putin again today. What was he saying?
There's no indication that Vladimir Putin has any intent to stop what he is doing. He had a teleconference with his Security Council, and at that he said everything is going according to plan. And he also said he is intent on, as he and other officials put it, denazifying Ukraine. Then we also had, you made a quick reference to it, President Macron of France made another phone call. 90 minutes he talked with Vladimir Putin. And a source at the Élysée Palace later came out and said the expectation is that the worst is yet to come and that President Putin is intent on taking over the entire country. And then just briefly here in Moscow, we continue to have those protests. They are taking place every day. The total of the number of people who've been arrested is somewhere around 8,000. And then on the information war side, two of the independent outlets, that would be TV Rain and Echo Moscow. Remember, they were kind of blocked by the government. Now, today, Thursday, they shut down. One of them at least is hoping to reopen. And Friday, the parliament will be looking at a law that would make it illegal to give, as they put it, fake news about the war, and that could be punished with up to 15 years in prison. Anderson?
Jill, I just want to jump in because we're showing the picture that you showed me earlier today.
Yeah.
This lady, who was maybe 5 feet tall, if that, and got to be in her 80s, upper 80s, I would say. This is the woman Vladimir Putin fears so much that she's being arrested by a mob of riot police and dragged off to be booked. It's extraordinary to me. This lady who's being applauded, standing there with two homemade handwritten signs protesting what is going on. This is the woman that Vladimir Putin, who rides around on a horse shirtless and likes to show himself off, you know, on a dojo with his black belt doing judo. As a tough guy, he is scared of this woman on the streets of Moscow just standing there with two handmade signs.
Yes, and interestingly, you know, those signs are against nuclear war. And that whole issue of nuclear weapons is hanging over all of us. Look at what's happening in the pictures you've been showing of that nuclear power plant. And this woman actually is, you know, she's very up in age, but she is anti-war. And there are her signs as she was dragged off by the police.
I mean, all the things that this woman has survived in the Soviet Union, through her entire life, she has seen the history of the Soviet Union through her entire life, to be dragged off the streets by Vladimir Putin, the tough guy. It's stunning. Appreciate, Jill, your reporting, and thank you for pointing out this image of me earlier today. I've been thinking about that woman. Let's hope we can find out what has happened to her. Caitlin, President Biden announced further sanctions on Russia late this afternoon. What more do we know about them?
Yeah, these are adding to that oligarchs sanctions list. This is 7 oligarchs that they are going after, adding to the sanctions list. Also going after Putin's personal spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov. Of course, you often hear from him. He's the one talking to reporters, spinning lies, saying that they're not invading Ukraine. They had no plans to invade Ukraine. Of course, we know that's not true. They're added on this list. They're also going after visa restrictions for 47 Russian oligarchs and their family members, their close associates, going after them as well. There is still a big question here tonight, Anderson, about banning Russian oil imports, something that the White House has been asked about, that President Biden has said is on the table. And notably here in Washington, there is bipartisan agreement on this. Republicans and Democrats alike coming together saying that they do think that that should happen, including House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who said, yes, ban the Russian oil imports. It's not a decision that the White House is ready to make yet. They talked about the interagency process that happens to make a decision like that. It's not clear that they are actually going to do that, but it certainly is something that there is pressure on the president to potentially do, even for members of his own party, Anderson.
Caitlin Collins, appreciate it. Jill Doherty, Sarah Seidner, Clarissa Ward as well. We're going to have more from Clarissa Ward coming up. Her visit to a hospital today in Kyiv. Coming up next, we'll talk about the nuclear plant fire, what we know about it now, what we don't know about it as well as the rest of the war. Retired Army 4-star General Wesley Clark.